my friends, my people who felt like my home.
All the victims, all the families, these are good people. They're suffering and they're going through so much pain. And we hope ultimately that the resolution here will provide some support on the road to healing.
Special prosecuting attorney Josh Hurwitz says the plea deal negotiated by both legal teams was the best possible outcome.
It provides finality. It prevents re-traumatization.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Can see through you, see your true color.
Well, good morning, everybody. Generally speaking, when we're talking about drug cases, they start off on a pretty small level. It could be something as simple as a tip from the community that is fed into a law enforcement agency. It could be something as simple as a traffic stop that occurs. Whether it's a state trooper or a sheriff's deputy or a city officer, when that case starts, the unique thing about here in Idaho is those partnerships start from the very beginning. Those cases tend to grow legs, they tend to get a little bit bigger. They will move outside the city limits, they'll move into other counties, they'll move into multiple counties and multiple cities, and was the case in this case, move to multiple states. And that's one of those things that we are proud of here in Idaho, and that unique perspective that from the moment of that case's inception, we are working together. There are no delays. We're immediately in this as a team from the start. If you turn and you look at the partnerships that we have here, quite frankly, in my mind, this should dissuade or make any high-level criminal organization second guess what they're going to do and if they're going to push their product here in Idaho. About making sure that those partnerships are strong and that we do it together. He understands that while we might be individual law enforcement agencies, we are one law enforcement community.
I'll go on for you, Josh. You talked about how a controlled buy was, I guess, one of the methods or procedures.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. A controlled buy, and our experts are right behind me here. A controlled buy is when law enforcement sets up essentially an undercover operation where...
I'll go on for you, Josh. You talked about how a controlled buy was, I guess, one of the methods or procedures.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. A controlled buy, and our experts are right behind me here. A controlled buy is when law enforcement sets up essentially an undercover operation where the supplier of the drugs is unknowingly selling a quantity to law enforcement, which secures the drug so it's out of the community and documents the sale, which then, of course, forms great evidence that the defendant or the target of the investigation was actually selling that illegal substance.
Now let me expand on how this took place. 2020, he was arrested. 2 counts of possession of a controlled substance, METH, with intent to deliver. Each one of those counts are punishable for up to 0 to life imprisonment. Now, he was sentenced on 9/16 of 2020 to 2 years probation in the drug court program. Now, anybody that's familiar with the drug court program will tell you it is a program that's designed to help you turn your life around. You plead guilty to your charges, and then if you complete the drug court program, your charges are then eligible to be expunged. That is a great factor to help somebody turn their life around. However, if they are not successful in completing the program and they have their probation revoked too many times, then they will be sentenced on their original charges without a plea agreement. So that means if you mess up in that drug court program, BM, too many times, you could be sentenced to life in the penitentiary. So what does he do? He immediately turns around the following day and gets arrested for paraphernalia with intent to use and possession of Mary Jane. You can see on 9/17/2020, the day after he's sentenced to drug court probation. Now, what happened? They revoked his probation and then re-sentenced him and gave him another chance. They also sent him to treatment for an indeterminate amount of days. So you can see his probation was reinstated on 4/12/21, and then it was extended through 4/12/2023. Take note of these yellow date boxes I'm putting on all of these because they're going to be important here in just a minute. He just couldn't keep it together. On 3/17/2022, he and his wife were arrested. And it wasn't even a major charge. It was a misdemeanor charge of drug paraphernalia with intent to use. However, because he was on drug court probation, he had already violated once. This was his second arrest after being put on drug court. Now it gets serious for him. And you can see in this record, in his records, that it lists this arrest. However, it doesn't have anything about him in the actual record on the arrest. There's only one way that could happen. But now something else has happened. Now his wife has been arrested and received a charge. And she has now been put on probation for that charge for a period of 2 years. He somehow keeps his name off the record because he is currently sentenced to drug court. And how can he do that? But come June, the situation hits critical mass because now you can bet because he quit transporting narcotics due to the situation that he was in, he now has his wife doing it, and she is arrested for possession with intent to deliver, METH. Same charge he had, except now she's already on probation. So it is getting very serious for them. Now, the only thing that can help them is the drug task force, I assure you. So from this point, it's literally like reading a storyboard. On August 16th, 2022, she was arraigned on those serious charges. August 17th, 2022, the notice of hearing, a pretrial conference and jury trial has been set. You can bet the drug task force has so much pressure on her and him at this point that they are about to break. But then everything turned out okay. On 9/7/2022, judgment of dismissal of count 3. 9/9/2022, dismissed count 2, the possession with intent to deliver, and sentenced to probation. So it all just magically worked out, right? So remember, I told you to keep note of those little yellow boxes on each one of those slides because it literally reads like a storyboard. 9/16, BM sentenced to drug court. 4/12, he's re-sentenced to drug court because he got arrested. 5/2, he's hidden from a record that he was arrested on, but now his wife is sentenced to probation. 6/3, the very next month, his wife is arrested again. 8/17, a jury trial was set in his wife's case, but then 20 days later, the deal is done, charges are dropped, she's back on probation. What happened between 8/17 and 9/7? Anything we can think of? We've documented through arrests and FBI surveillance reports that the Aryan family, whose members and associates were arrested from December 9th, 2022 to March 27th, 2023. And they were trafficking large quantities of narcotics by bringing them from Arizona to Seattle and Tacoma, transporting them to Spokane, and then distributing across Washington into Idaho and even up to Alaska, according to the arrest reports. During this exact time, the parents of 2 of the victims in this case, both Ben and his wife, as well as Ms. Kernodle, are arrested for major charges as all of this came to fruition. Now, a key trafficking route for the Omerta cell of the Aryan family, led by Gil, is across I-90 into Spokane. It is likely from extensive research that Spokane Valley was the drop-off point of the narcotics, and some of the associates that assisted in getting the narcotics from Spokane into Idaho was likely, verified through arrest records, Ben and Corey more than likely using Kara as their mule. Now, Gil, who the FBI claims was making millions of dollars during this time frame trafficking, he can be verified in Spokane Valley on August 15, 2022, purchasing a $120,000 BMW. Not bad. Now, the court record verifies that both Ben and Corey, as well as Kara's charges, were reduced tremendously around August 30th, 2022, indicating that they were likely working with law enforcement. Not so coincidentally, around this exact same time, a guy named Farley was arrested for trafficking. Now, this is no small feat considering the quantity that he had with him when he was arrested and the fact that he is labeled at the time as a transient. Typically, transients don't have that type of volume. But more importantly, the same day that Farley is arrested, the same time that the charges are reduced for both Ben and Corey as well as Kara, not so coincidentally, the same day, the OCD ETF, which is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, operated by U.S. attorneys in their respective divisions, like Josh Hurwitz, the prosecutor for the Koberger case, they are provided with information from an unnamed confidential informant, and on that very date, wiretaps are issued for Gil and his crew. If he's in Spokane Valley on August 15th, and then by August 30th, a confidential informant has given information to start a wiretap, and that's exactly the time that the charges are reduced on the parents' cases, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put two and two together. Just like I showed you in the beginning on that map of association, two of their associates who they knew transported narcotics from Coeur d'Alene to Julietta just happened to be arrested on August 30th, 2022 for trafficking. And if you know, it was such a big deal, it's one of the only major arrests that even makes the newspaper there in Moscow. So strangely enough, when we revisit this timeline, and we go through all of these events and we get to 8/17/2022 where the jury trial is set in his wife's case, I think they beat his feet on the street until he got them some information. And that information on 8/30/2022 quite possibly provided confidential informant information on a major trafficking group, and by ruining the shipment Farley and Rhodes had, implicated them in taking down another major trafficking group. And then 9/7, their deal is done. So everything worked out for them in the end, right?
New twist in the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Police are now saying that they are not sure if the victims were targeted. Walking back statements from prosecutors about the investigation, the shift comes after people across Idaho gathered for emotional vigils to honor the 4 students who were lost. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky joins us now from Moscow, Idaho. So, Morgan, this is the second key detail about that case that has kind of changed. Early on, police said there was no threat to the community in the first few days, and then they said, well, wait, maybe there is. And now they seem to be walking back another detail. Can you explain?
Yeah, Kate, I think a lot of the confusion surrounding this targeted statement stemmed from the fact that when the prosecutor said that it could be location-based and not individual-based, that got a lot of people thinking that it had shifted the direction of the investigation.
You see, we tracked the arrest that pertains to the Idaho 4 case for the mama of one of the victims back to August 12th, 2021. Much like the others, it is a possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver, meth. And once again, that carries a 0 to life term of imprisonment. Now, 8/12/21, follow the dates on this one. Again, it's like watching time-lapse photography. Then on October 25th, 2021, she had a status conference scheduled. You can see that she failed to appear for that status conference. A bench warrant for failure to appear was issued for her arrest. Again, that was October 25th, 2021. She disappeared, and law enforcement didn't catch up to her until the next year. But come August 19th, 2022, she was arrested in Spokane, Washington on that bench warrant. And then August 19th, 2022, she was transferred to the custody order of the sheriff to be transported from Spokane, Washington, back to the jail in Coeur d'Alene. Now, it's unclear what happened between 8/19/2022 when she was in the custody of the sheriff, and her next status conference in Coeur d'Alene. But what is certain is that sheriff that the court transferred into the custody of was no doubt a member of either the Quad Cities Drug Task Force or Task Force 9 that operated in Coeur d'Alene and Spokane, because the sheriff's office is what makes up the majority of that task force. Now, you got to understand, at this point, she is facing serious charges for possession with intent to deliver with a serious history, and she failed to appear for her court appearance and has been missing for almost a year. The pressure that the task force would be putting on her at this time would be immense, just like the other folks. But nobody worry, because everything turned out just fine. On September 6, 2022, they allowed her to change her plea to guilty. They reduced all of her charges and had her scheduled to be sentenced to probation. And it's oddly the exact same agreement that was made to the other parents in the case. So everything worked out fine. But once again, this thing's like reading a storyboard. On August 12, 2021, she is arrested. On October 5th, 2021, 2 months later, she fails to appear for her court appearance and they issued a warrant. She literally disappeared for almost a year before she is arrested on August 19th on that warrant in Spokane, Washington. They release her to the custody of the sheriff and the drug task force on the same day. And then sometime between 8/19 and September 7th, something magic happened and her charges were reduced and she was set to be sentenced to probation. Wow. So it almost seems like setting their associates here up was pretty much a team effort, because you can see that on 8/30, her associates were arrested making a trip from Coeur d'Alene down to Julietta in Moscow on 8/30/2022 for trafficking. The same day that Farley is arrested, the same time that the charges are reduced for both Ben and Corey as well as Kara. Not so coincidentally, the same day, the OCD ETF, which is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, operated by U.S. attorneys in their respective divisions, like Josh Hurwitz, the prosecutor for the Koberger case. They are provided with information from an unnamed confidential informant, and on that very date, wiretaps are issued for Gill and his crew. Now, did anything special happen for her after they were arrested? So once again, when we look at the storyboard, 8/12, she's arrested. 10/5/2021, she fails to appear and then disappears. 8/19/2022, she's finally arrested again in Spokane on her failure to appear warrant. 8/19, she's transferred into the custody of the sheriff and the drug task force. And then between 8/19 and 9/7 on 8/30, a confidential informant provides the OCD ETF intel on the emerita sale of the Aryan family, possibly implicating her in taking down a major trafficking group, and disrupts Farley and Rhodes' delivery of their shipment, therefore possibly implicating her in another takedown of a trafficking group. And then, strangely enough, she is offered a wonderful deal to where she doesn't serve any jail time. But you know what? I guess we could look at it as good news for her and the father and the stepmother, because they avoided prison time and seems to have gotten away with it. And everybody can say, well, Pavarotti, you can't prove anything happened because of that.
It only takes one moment, 1 minute, one night for lives to be turned upside down.
Now, what's really strange is when you put the father and stepmother next to the mother in the timeline, the similarities are astonishing, especially when you get down to 8/19 and 8/17, and then magically on 9/7, both of their charges go away. Folks, I couldn't even explain it better than that. Not so coincidentally, the Omerta boys.
The Oath of Omerta.
You may have heard the term thrown around, but do you really know what it means? In short, is the Code of Silence. This Code of Silence can be found in many different groups, from the mafia to biker gangs. The idea is that if you keep quiet about what you see, then no one will ever know about it. And this silence can be enforced through threats or violence. If you break the
Oath of Omerta,
you could be putting yourself and others in danger. So next time you hear the word Omerta, remember it means more than just silence. It's a dangerous code that can put lives at risk.
Who is documented making many trips to Arizona and back using the Oregon-California route, is documented traveling on a one-time odd trip to Boise, Idaho on October the 19th, 2022, less than 3 weeks till the atrocity on King Road. Among trafficking groups like this, territory is always important. Considering that the Aryan family controls Washington and the Aryan Knights control Idaho, a hit would need to go through the proper control and authority of that territory, which not so coincidentally is operated out of Boise, Idaho. A likely solution to the territory issue is a man who spent years in both the prisons of Washington and Idaho. Mowich, a man previously unknown until the release of the police reports, fit that bill perfectly. Final verification of this came on December 3rd, 2022, when none other than Gill and Slocum traveled under the radar without detection from the watchful eye of the FBI, all the way from Shelton, Washington to Lewiston, Idaho, to attend the funeral of Mowich. This is the final piece to the puzzle.
I couldn't make this shit up. I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. I'm sad that I lack the talent to make this shit up.
Although massively underreported over the last decade, more than 1 million Americans have died from overdoses during the opioid epidemic, and that number is increasing by the day due to the new fentanyl crisis in America, along with other narcotics. This is very underreported, but it is being attacked by all federal, state, and local agencies in different ways. The main culprits identified by the federal and local and state agencies are the Mexican narcotic cartels that are importing in mass quantities tons of narcotics into the United States over the last decade to this very day. The main agency designated to curb the flow of narcotics coming into our country from Mexico and other countries is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And it's their agency, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, that is tasked with stemming the flow of narcotics that comes across the border into the country. But that's just the start. Other agencies are tasked with attacking the issue once the narcotics are in our country. And those agencies include the DEA, the FBI, state and federal agencies, as well as their local prosecuting attorneys and their U.S. district attorneys, and their task force that are organized to work with all of these agencies, as well as the local task forces that operate in local areas. And if you pay close attention to the news cycles over the last decade, you'll see that law enforcement's focus has increasingly focused on prison gangs organizing in and outside of the prison walls and involved with the cartels and distributing the narcotics throughout the United States. A scary proposition. Gangs like the Ghost-Faced Gangsters, a prison gang that operates inside and outside of the prison walls in the eastern part of the United States, southeastern, Florida, Georgia, Alabama. The MO is almost always the same. Their power reaching beyond the prison walls to the outside world in trafficking narcotics. These gangs are spread out all over the United States, all the way up to the Northwest, where you see organizations like the Aryan family being attacked. And then in Idaho, for several years now, the focus has been on the infamous Aryan Knights. And there are many different forms of leadership and organization inside and outside the prison walls. In fact, the most successful of these organizations seem to be the ones related to the white power movement that are in great numbers across the United States. Some of these organizations are branched out from the main Aryan Brotherhood, and they have their own names and symbols, but they're all part of the same group, such as the 211 Group of Colorado, the Solidwood Soldiers of Texas, also the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, known as the Aryan Circle, the Aryan Nations of Tennessee, the Indiana Aryan Brotherhood, the Mississippi Aryan Brotherhood, the Ohio Aryan Brotherhood, the Pecker Woods of Missouri, the Peony or Public Enemy Number 1 of California, the Saxton Knights of Indiana, the Soldiers of Aryan Culture of Utah, the Unforgiven of Florida, the Universal Aryan Brotherhood of Oklahoma, WAR, the White Aryan Resistance of Arkansas, the White Knights, another Texas gang. All of these different organizations are offshoots of the original Aryan Brotherhood started in California, and they all communicate in a similar way. They represent themselves with symbols and numbers, and they communicate through Odinistic runes, a language that only they can decipher. And it's not just the white supremacist gangs who operate this way. All operate this way, like the Sereños, MS-13, And one thing you'll notice as you start to look closely in their numbers and symbols is a lot of the gangs' numbers are represented by 13. See, in their alphabet, the numbers equal the letters. And the number 13, that stands for the letter M in most of their translations. M means one thing normally.
If you live in an Arkansas zip code and have 0 DUIs in the last 5 years, listen carefully.
Equal the letters. And the number 13, that stands for the letter M in most of their translations. M means one thing normally. The Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Forces, the OCDETF, is an independent component of the U.S. Department of Justice. Established in 1982, the OCDETF is the centerpiece of the Attorney General's strategy to combat transnational organized crime and to reduce the availability of illicit narcotics in the nation by using a prosecutor-led, multi-agency approach to enforcement. The OCDETF leverages the resources and expertise of its partners in concentrated, coordinated, long-term enterprise investigations of transnational organized crime, money laundering, and major drug trafficking networks.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Lowry, and I am the acting United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. We are here today to announce the unsealing of 4 indictments that charge 43 people in the United States and Mexico with violating federal drug trafficking laws and money laundering laws. A total of 30 people are now in custody following a major operation in the Houston area that also spans several jurisdictions and states to include Florida, Louisiana, and Alabama, and other parts of Texas. The arrests are the result of a 20-month OCDF operation, Operation Knock.
Are getting some new details tonight after the feds bust dozens of people in the Houston area in a drug and money laundering scheme, all tied to one of the most dangerous drug cartels. Thank you for joining us tonight at 10 o'clock. I'm Daniela Guzman.
And I'm Keith Garvin. Federal prosecutors say the criminal network used cell phone stores in Houston to get drug money back to Mexico. KPRC2's Bryce Newberry is live in the newsroom tonight to explain how all this went down. Bryce?
Yeah, Keith, Danny, nearly 30 people have been arrested, a majority of them from the Houston area, all with alleged ties to the Jalisco New Generation drug cartel. This nearly 2-year investigation, dubbed Operation Notch, involved undercover operations with the DEA and IRS, but it is a little complex, so let me try to explain here. The cartel, also known as CJNG, would send drugs to the U.S. and sell them. That money would then be taken to 2 Houston area cell phone stores, including an undercover shop set up by federal agents. And then, according to prosecutors, the money paid for phones that got shipped to 7 other cell phone stores in Mexico, where they'd be sold at higher prices in pesos, and then the proceeds would go back to the cartel. The main reason for all of this, of course, to avoid detection by law enforcement by not shipping large amounts of money.
And Bryce, we know that this is considered one of the most violent and dangerous drug cartels out there. What did it take to solve this, to get to this point?
Well, the DEA special agent in charge told us it took a lot to crack the code on this sophisticated organization. Take a listen.
Not only did we crack the code, we went undercover and we got down and dirty with them and created cell phone stores that they did not know it was us, law enforcement. We took their money, we helped them, and now they're going to jail and they will pay for it.
Now we hear about the agencies conducting the operations, the OCDETF, the FBI assisting them, the DEA working with them also, the local task forces and departments as well. But all of the agencies that work together are part of the OCDETF in these operations, and they are directed by U.S. attorneys in their respected districts, just like you see in the Houston case. The announcement is always made by the director, which is the U.S. attorney. Now, when we move to Washington State, we've got first the Western District, U.S. Attorney Nick Brown, and then the Eastern District of Washington, U.S. Attorney Vanessa Waldroff. Now, moving on to the state of Idaho, you have U.S. Attorney Josh Hurwitz.
During the press conference, local agencies recognize Idaho as being an ideal location for drug dealers, saying more than ever before due to the number of highways that lead to our cities, both dealers and users are here in Idaho.
These overlapping investigations resulted in 18 indictments of 25 individuals involved in drug trafficking and firearm offenses in southwestern Idaho.
Two dedicated large-scale organized crime and drug enforcement task force were dedicated to this operation. During these investigations, law enforcement seized approximately 98 pounds of methamphetamine, approximately 21 fentanyl pills, 531 grams of fentanyl powder, 38 firearms, 3 bulletproof vests, and more than 121,000 US dollars.
Having these illicit drugs removed from the street has made this community safer. We all know that drugs and violence go together, that they go hand in hand.
It is believed that several of the 25 arrested are associated with local street gangs that have ties to the Jalisco Nuevo Generation cartel.
This threat, as I've said before, is real. It's not imagined. Your kids, your family members are at risk because of this criminality.
As for the leads to this case, officials say these big operations can get started with something as simple as pulling over an individual.
Having these illicit drugs removed from the street has made this community safer. We all know that drugs and violence go together.
This threat, as I've said before, is real. It's not imagined. Your kids, your family members are at risk because of this criminality. This threat, as I've said before, is real. It's not imagined. Your kids, your family members are at risk because of this criminality.
Morning. Local, state, and federal officials gathered in Tacoma this morning to announce a major victory. I'm extremely proud to say thank you to our state, federal partners. We needed this, and we appreciate our partnership with you. Thank you. Agents seized massive amounts of drugs, guns, and money last Wednesday in a multi-state takedown operation in Washington and Arizona.
Indicted 27 defendants.
U.S. Attorney Nick Brown says the operation was the result of months of investigation into a drug ring with connections to the Aryan family, a white supremacy group active in Washington state prisons. Brown called the operation significant.
Approximately 1.9 million doses of fentanyl and more than 230 pounds of methamphetamine.
Acting DEA Special Agent Jacob Galvin says that's enough fentanyl to kill everyone in Seattle and Tacoma and poison an additional 500,000 people. U.S. Attorney Brown said he's not only concerned with the drugs coming from Mexico, but the guns that are going to Mexico. Brown says 225 firearms were seized throughout the course of this investigation. Robert Hammer of Homeland Security says many of those weapons could have made their way to Mexico to land in the hands of cartels. Brown says that's unacceptable.
To see all these weapons, as Special Agent Hammer said, go down to Mexico, where the cartels are engaged in daily violence and people are dying on a daily basis, and knowing that those weapons are principally
How has your office really tackled the opioid epidemic, both on a federal level and locally in our community?
So this time in office has truly been all hands on deck approach to how do we approach the opioid epidemic, which we see fentanyl as really the driving poison in our communities at this moment. And our office plays a critical role in prosecuting large drug trafficking organizations. We have international and national resources in order to identify where these drugs are coming into our communities, and we do very sophisticated operations to seize the largest amounts of fentanyl pills or other illicit narcotics to make sure they don't get into our communities. Those amounts of fentanyl are overwhelming. They're coming into our community at high rates, and they're very inexpensive. They're very available. So we are every day working on trying to seize those drugs and prosecute the large drug trafficking organizations.
Well, as we mentioned, law enforcement says both Umphenauer and Meade are affiliated with the Aryan Knights prison gang. U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Idaho is working with the FBI, state and local law enforcement on this investigation.
U.S. Attorney Josh Hurwitz says it's too soon to tell whether or not the crimes the men are accused of committing are gang-sanctioned or gang-related. I asked Hurwitz about his knowledge of the white supremacist prison gang and his office's history with prosecuting cases involving AK members.
So the Aryan Knights is a prison gang local to Idaho that was formed in the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s. It sort of took off a bit within the Idaho Department of Correction prison system and those facilities. It has since continued and has had up to an estimated 85 to 100 members at its height. And then in 2018, we indicted the leadership of that gang federally using the RICO statute, and that case has been being prosecuted ever since. There's one more defendant from, again, that leadership group remaining to go to trial here later on this year. They were a very violent gang. We do think that the indictment, again, back in 2018, which charged 10 of the leadership of the gang, had an effect in splintering up the organization, but not completely, as is evident from continued membership of folks in the AK.
What are the ideologies of the Aryan Knights?
So at its core, it is a white supremacist gang that only allowed white members and subscribed to white supremacist ideologies and targeted, because of that, inmates from minority communities or other marginalized communities within the IDOC system.
Is it understood that AK operates both inside Idaho Department of Correction facilities and outside facilities?
That's been our experience. The gang formed, within the prison walls, for the most part. But, as happens, different inmates are released at different times after doing their time. They continue to associate. And then they also used associates on the outside for example, the drug smuggling activities that I mentioned was going on at the time of our indictment.
U.S. attorneys' cases involving Aryan Knights also involve allegations and convictions of extortion, violent assaults, gambling in prison, and drug smuggling, as you just heard. Like many gangs, Hurwitz says AK has a hierarchy, and sometimes leaders pull people in involuntarily.
Yeah, they do. Hurwitz says it's surprising how many people outside prison walls, in fact, who've never even served time or met these gang members, will develop relationships, support, and commit crimes for inmates.
124-316-65. State of Idaho versus Brian Kohberger. Comes now. The state of Idaho, by and through the LIEDAHO County prosecuting attorney, William Wofer Thompson Jr., and gives notice to the court and opposing counsel that special deputy prosecuting attorney Joshua D. Hurwitz, Idaho State Bar number 9527, will appear as an attorney for the state in this matter.
My friends, my people who felt like my home.
All the victims, all the families, these are good people. They're suffering and they're going through so much pain. And we hope ultimately that the resolution here will provide some support on the road to healing.
Special prosecuting attorney Josh Hurwitz says the plea deal negotiated by both legal teams was the best possible outcome.
It provides finality. It prevents re-traumatization.
On August 14, 2025, an interview was conducted by Kevin Fixler and Alex Breeze of the Idaho Statesman with investigators in the Kohberger case, like Detective Gilbertson of the ISP and Dollinger of the MPD. And here's what they had to say about the investigation. On almost a daily basis, Dollinger said, investigators would have another possible suspect to rule out. They chased claims that a dealer was selling drugs to the fraternities and sororities on campus, according to records, and a tip about a man in his 60s in Kitsap County, Washington, near Seattle, who drove a white Hyundai Elantra and was accused of trying to entice children. Investigators also reviewed sale of records of K-bar knives from all over Idaho and Washington. One of the reports showed from Boise to Coeur d'Alene to Spokane to Seattle. We were trying to find whatever connection we could, and we were looking at all potential angles, right? Dollinger said very early on, we were like, okay, could this have been drug related? Could it have been family related? Could it have been, there were a million different theories out there, and we had to kind of test each one of them and ask some questions. And most of them got dashed very quickly. Yet, in all of the court documents that have been released, in all of the Moscow PD police reports that have been released, in all of the Idaho State Police reports that have been released, not one shows any investigation into whether or not this atrocity could have been family related. Not one interview with any family members about this situation. Yet to this very day, with Brian Koberger, a PhD student, sitting in prison for these crimes, and the lead prosecutor in the case continues to say we have no motive or working theory around what caused this crime. How about a big plate full of BS? Somebody's got to ask the real questions.
Can I be your superhero?